You're listening to episode 10 of the Confident Rider podcast with Jane Pike. Hello, fabulous human. Welcome back to the Confident Rider podcast. I have something very exciting for you today, and that is an interview. Actually, it's more of a conversation between Warwick Schiller and myself that we recorded shortly after our time together at the Western States Horse Expo. Some of you will be aware that I was in California recently, and actually last week's episode was a recording of one of the clinics I did there on dealing with fear. I also did a joint clinic with Warwick on mindfulness, and he held a number of his own clinics dealing with different horse and rider combinations on a variety of different things. We decided to catch up and reflect back over our time together over the 4 days of the expo, talk about the different things that came up for us and also the direction that we're taking things in. If you aren't familiar with Warwick and you're keen to learn more about him, you can jump on his website www.warwickschiller.com. But right now we're going to get straight into the conversation. I really hope you enjoy it. Okay, so today is, what day are we? Monday. We've just got back from the Western States Horse Expo, and I'm actually experiencing a bit of a clinic hangover after talking so much the last 4 days. But I wanted to take full advantage because I am with Warwick Schiller right now, and we have been together at the expo talking once together on mindfulness, and then Warwick's been doing his thing in the arena as well. So I thought we could have a bit of a chat about what happened over the last 4 days with the horses and your experiences and feedback and thoughts.
Yeah, there was a lot that happened, but I think it was funny. You know, we got to send in our titles for the demos we do a long time ahead of time, and I'm not sure what title we sent in for ours, but in the program it just said mindfulness.
Yeah.
Not anything tricky, but just mindfulness. I was surprised anybody showed up to hear such a bland title.
I'm the same, yeah.
You know, I had 4 demos with horses and riders or horses and handlers or whatever, and I gave them all very interesting sounding names so people would come and watch so I could then tell them about mindfulness. You know, I think one of them was called the one thing that will change your relationship with your horse, and it just might change you too, or something like that. And there was, I put in some interesting titles so people show up, and then I really hit them with the
with the deep stuff.
The deep stuff when they get there.
Yeah, but what was cool, we had a really full crowd for that particular talk that we did together.
We did.
So we did a joint talk, and the title was just mindfulness, and when I read it in the program I thought, could have perhaps been a little bit more specific about that one. But part of the experience or the feedback that I've been getting just generally lately is that there is like a groundswell of thought that is relating much more to how it is that we are affecting our horses, or really seeing ourselves as the first point of reference in the relationship, in terms of how it is that our energy is affecting them and what it is that we bring to the arena, and how that shows up and affects our training and what it is that we experience. And it seems that maybe not that long ago, having that as a topic wouldn't have been such a draw card at an event like the Expo on the weekend, but it was really interesting to people to talk about now and to get into.
Yeah, I was at an expo in Minnesota the week before, and I was kind of the headliner there. So one of the, I had the Coliseum, I had the main arena, and I went to the rodeo on one night there, and it was full, and they told me it was sold out, and it seats 5,500 people. And the day I did my talk, there had to be 2,000 people in that thing. It was half full. There was a lot of people there, and I talked a lot about mindfulness and not training your horse. You know, more about being present with your horse, going out and doing your meditation with your horse, maybe doing things like hand grazing and matching steps with your horse, which you have to be very mindful to do if you're going to do it. Things like that. And no one left. I think there was actually more people there at the end of the talk than there was at the beginning. And the people that came by the booth afterward, I think you probably experienced it this weekend too, but the people that came by the booth afterwards were all about that stuff. And I actually had one lady come by the booth, and she has a PhD in psychology, and she is really into horses as a path to spirituality. Mm-hmm. And she'd never heard of me when she came to the Horse Expo, and she was walking around, and she got a text from one of her friends, said, "You need to come over to the Coliseum. There's a guy over here quoting Wayne Dyer and Brene Brown." And so she came over, and I met her, and I had the the funniest thing, probably the most surreal thing that's ever happened to me at a horse expo was after that talk I did, I had a lot of people come by the booth and they were talking about energy and things like that. And in the line to talk to me was this big, tall, gruff-looking cowboy man. He had bib and brace overalls on, big old heavy work coat, beat up old cowboy hat, and he was all leather-faced. He had to be 70 years old, looked a bit like John Wayne. And he came up to the booth and he said, "So, you've been talking about energy with those horses?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Do you want to know the best way to get a horse to move off of energy?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll bite, you know." I'm thinking he's going to say, "Take a big stick." And he says, "So the best way to get a horse to move off energy is you harness a great deal of energy in your root chakra and then you pull it up into your heart space and you breathe it towards them." And I just could have fallen over backwards because that's like woo-woo stuff coming in.
Totally
this
surreal.
7-year-old cowboy, yeah.
Yeah. So the last couple of years, would you say, has been a real shifting point or a turning point in you in terms of your own experiences and how it is you're approaching your training and, you know, what's going up on the subscription and just generally your whole approach to horses?
Yeah, definitely, you know, and I think some people know this story, but what's funny enough, it all came about from a horse at Rubbenboard a few years ago that was very shut down, that what I used to do didn't work, and he really got me looking outside, you know, outside the lens in which I've been looking at things with, and he kind of led me to realise that I've been shut down for a long time, so that led me to do some inner work myself, and that in itself has helped with the horses. So it's, yeah, these days I really don't read horse training books that much. I don't watch other people's horse training videos or read articles that much, and I've always done that. I tend to read self-helpy books, spiritually books, mindfulness practice books, meditation books, things like that, because it's really made a difference with the horses, because I'm really starting to, you've heard me quote Wayne Dyer before, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And when you really change the way you look at horse behaviours, these days I no longer look at any behaviour they exhibit as something I would desire to fix. I tend to look at it as valuable information about how that horse feels about the situation, whether the situation is me or something else. And so I no longer think of I no longer look at behaviours where I want to fix them. I tend to be a bit more empathetic and understand that basically all horse behaviours, most undesired horse behaviours, anxiety.
So then when we think about like translating that to the actual experience of an expo setting or a clinic setting where you're essentially demonstrating something to an audience, how has that been going? Like when you've had horses over the last 4 days and a horse comes in, I think what you're talking about is so much about the subtlety of understanding horse behaviour as well and being able to read them, as opposed to, you know, looking for the more obvious or typical things that might be traditionally seen as a horse that's being naughty or misbehaving, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the last 4 days I had 4 different horses. The first day it was a horse on the ground on the lead rope and halter, and he was a warm blood from a horse rescue, an anxious warm blood from a horse rescue. The second day I had a little horse, and there's a what they call a drill team here in America. Some of you may have seen it. You know, some of you from overseas may have seen it on video.
Is that
like
the Californian cowgirls?
Yeah, they're called the California cowgirls, and they come in and they do this elaborate pattern sort of thing. But a girl that rides with them, she has trouble with a horse. It won't go in the arena. It rears up. He does all sorts of, he's got a lot of anxiety. There was her. Then the next day I had a girl on an Arabian that had some anxiety riding, and then the last day I had another horse from the same horse rescue, and he's an off-the-track thoroughbred that, funnily enough, is normally very good. And at the Horse Expo, they used him in one of Jim Masterson's demos, so Jim does the Masterson method, which is a very low stress, almost non-touching. How would you describe it?
I think Masterson method is, it varies in regards to or in parallel to traditional bodywork methods where you're looking to really mobilise any blockages of energy or physical restriction within the horse and allow them to heal themselves essentially. And when you're doing that, you are working just above the resistance line where they might naturally start to hold themselves or freeze up or increase the level of tension. And it's more about, and I'm totally paraphrasing here, bringing energetic awareness to a spot where they might be restricted or blocked. And as a result of that awareness, they basically release what is there themselves.
Very well said, Jane. So this horse was in Jim's thing the day before, and he's normally very quiet. And after Jim worked on him, and Jim's deal, I think it's very much like some of the stuff I do, to where it's all about releasing mental tension, which causes the physical tension. And this horse, after Jim worked on him, was then anxious. He was running around his stall, weaving backwards and forwards, behaviours he doesn't normally show. And I really believe that horse, in his former quiet state, was shut down.
Yeah.
And now he's out in the open. And so he was the last one I worked with. But all 4 of those horses, I probably did the least amount I've ever done to a horse in front of a crowd before, and probably had the most change. And all of those horses, I haven't only an hour session. I probably spent the first 20 minutes just talking, kind of introducing the concepts of what I was going to do. And so the most I worked with any of them was for 40 minutes. And I didn't do much with them anyway, but every single one of them was like the horse read the script.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
There was a huge change in all 4 of them. And like I said, it was the least amount of stuff I've done, but I really think one of the things that helped everything was the fact that I'm really getting comfortable with being in front of a crowd and not having to tell them what I think they want to hear or see what they think they want to see. I think I'm getting more and more comfortable in my own new skin to where I can kind of talk my truth and act my truth in front of a crowd. And I think when you be that way, you can do very little. A lot of it had to do with them just reading my energy. But 2 of the horses I didn't touch. I wasn't riding them, so it wasn't necessarily that. But I think the advice that I offered the 2 riders probably may have been better than it had been before, because I think I'm quite prepared to do nothing in front of a crowd. And it was amazing that the changes in them were rather extreme, actually.
It ties into something I've been thinking about just since we got back from the expo, and I think we were talking about this in the truck on the way home as well, in that one of the comments that I had come up time and time again was, wow, you guys are so brave to be talking about this stuff, or it's so great that you have a platform to discuss the types of things you're discussing, which was mainly in reference to partnership with our horses, the kind of soulful element of horse training and ownership, the idea of different forms of leadership as well, in terms of not having to be the dominant one or always having to be the boss or always having to win, and how, the ramifications of that on the relationship. And I guess considering the emotional side for both ourselves and our horses, and it kind of struck me because for me it's just so much a part of how I think and operate, and I'm blessed to have conversations with people or like minds who think the same thing, that I occasionally forget that this is outside of the mainstream conversation at times. But in saying that, there is a huge level of interest, and it immediately resonates with people who come and listen, in that that's the thing that we're missing or that we're working on. It's that connection, that comes through approaching things in a slightly different way. And I guess for me also, as a professional and someone who's talking to people a lot as well, I really admire in you your bravery and courage, which I know it may not even feel like that, but that ability to be congruent and in alignment with your beliefs and your practices, and have the courage to present that even when you might have been presenting something different for a really long time. Or there is an expectation about what you want to see, because a part of it, that you can step into that performance element when you're in a clinic, and it would be easy for you to be able to get a horse up, for instance, and then bring them down with the skills that you have.
Right.
Like, that's something that you're able to do. So to choose not to do that and know that that's not what you want to be contributing to in terms of the conversation is a really big deal, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I think I'm just recognising smaller and smaller levels of anxiety in horses. So, some of those may have, people, the one girl in the Arabian, she said, well, he's fine right now, but a little while ago, the California cowgirls were in here riding around with their flags, and he was really worried right then. And I said, and I was sitting on Petey, and this girl was sitting beside me on her Arabian, and she said, he's fine right now. And I said, well, he doesn't look fine right now because his posture is completely different to Petey's. His neck's sticking straight up in the air, and he's chewing rather anxiously on the bit. And I said, a lot of people might think because he's an Arabian, he has a different posture than Petey. But I said, do you get him sedated when the vet does his teeth? And she said, yep. And I said, when they sedate him and his muscles relax, does his head go higher or lower? And she said, it goes lower. And I said, okay, so when he stops using muscles that hold his head up, his head goes down. They're all, they're all the same. And she thought he was quite fine right then, but he was not obviously worried. But if you look close enough, there's enough worry to realise that he's already, when the California Cowgirls came by, it was just another, what the therapist might call trigger stacking. You stack enough triggers and then you have an emotional outburst or something or other. And that horse, what I call rabbits really, and that horse had some triggers already, and it doesn't take long to stack them on there. And I said something at one point in time and the crowd clapped, and this horse jumped up and down and did all the dancey thing. And then we did some work with him, which was basically nothing. And then the next time the crowd clapped, he didn't move. And we didn't work on an Arabian who spooks when the crowd claps. We didn't work on the clapping. We didn't go anywhere near the clapping. We actually didn't, and we didn't desensitize him to anything. We just made him feel a little more at peace with himself, a little more trusting of his rider. And what we actually did, I said, just go ahead and ask him to walk and don't steer him. And usually when someone does that, the horse will walk straight to the gate and stop. And then we'll go, okay, we'll just do what I call choose where you work, choose where you rest. If he goes to the gate and stops, we'll just pick up a trot and not steer him. And after a while, he may go away from the gate. And if he does, we'll let him sit. But there's no punishment for being at the gate. It's just choosing where you work. I mean, no horse thinks, oh, I'm trotting, I'm being abused. But when she asked him to walk, he didn't walk towards the gate. He actually walked the other way, went up the other end, had a look over the fence, then he walked back to the gate, stopped. He looked over the gate for about 30 seconds, and then he wandered off again. As he was wandering off back towards the centre of the arena, away from the gate, he went and let his breath out 2 times. And I said, it seems like all we needed to do was let him go where he thought might be a bit better. And when he got there, we let him stand there, and he kind of went, you know what? It's not really any different over here. And when he walked away from there, that's when he started to let down. We didn't actually do a single thing with this horse, except let him explore the arena and realise, give him the autonomy to have a look around. And that's all we did. And when he got there, he went, oh, okay, it's no different than over here. And he just started to let down. But I think it was the rider allowing him to make those decisions and do a little bit of searching. And I'm not saying, hey, just get on your horse and not do anything and it'll all be good. But in that situation, that's all we did with him. And the next time the crowd clapped, he didn't move at all. So it was more like, the girl said, I want him to trust me more. And I think I made the quote then. You've all seen the quote on social media somewhere. It says, in order to get something you've never got before, you have to give something you've never given. And with that particular horse, all the girl had to do was just give up complete control. I mean, it wasn't like she was a control freak by any means. But she just had to go, hey, what interests you? What do you want to do? And it was crazy. He just had a little walk around the arena, and then he really started to let down. And then when he stood still, he was standing still, and he was completely happy to be there. And the crowd clapping no longer bothered him. It was kind of freaky, really.
Yeah. I had that trust question come up in one of my clinics too, with a lady that said she had an accident and then she just doesn't trust all horses. She was talking about it very generally like that. I don't trust all horses, and how do I get over that? And I use the analogy that, how do you feel? How do you respond to someone that doesn't trust you? Do you trust someone that doesn't trust you? And essentially, in order to breed trust, you have to give trust. And that happens through the practice of incrementally dancing within that line where you do feel safe and competent, for instance, and you're able to extend the same courtesies to your horse, like give them a certain amount of freedom to make a mistake, which I think is what often we're trying to avoid. We're micromanaging a situation, and find that line where you ask yourself, well, this is a situation I don't trust and this is a situation that I do trust, and just dance between those two areas so that you can gradually expand that trust line between you both. And it's a practice of consistency and figuring things out together in terms of actually building that relationship and extending the trust. But I do think it is a practice of actually giving it as much as you're wanting to see it come back to you, as a practice when you're out there riding.
Yeah, most certainly. I used to be really big on the whole leadership thing, like I'm the leader of this whole thing, and I was really big on personal space, for instance. The horse cannot come into my personal space, but I can go into theirs because that's how I establish leadership. I have completely changed my thoughts on that. But what I have found is I think I had this like personal space wall, and it wasn't just horses that I kept at arm's length. I think it was most people too. People in airports didn't talk to me. Didn't used to talk to me. Now people strike up conversations with me that they never did before, and I think it's got to do with I've just let my guard down a little bit. And I really think that's what's enabling these days for me to get a lot more done with horses by doing a lot less. And so and once I discovered that, that's at clinics these days, I'm really trying to get people to work more on themselves than on their horses, because, I mean, Jane, you've been to my clinics for a number of years now, and in the past you would have heard me say, I'm not talented, but I have a process, and if you can break your process into small enough pieces, you can get some good stuff done. I'm not talented, other people are talented, and I think I'm starting to realize, or I think I know what talent actually is, and I think a big part of talent is having that open heart, you might say, about you, instead of being a bit closed off.
I read a book called Centered Riding by Sally Swift a long time ago, and she talks about soft eyes and hard eyes. And to me, I've used that analogy in different areas where if you approach a situation with soft eyes, metaphorically, you're analysing the entire context of the situation. And where I have gone wrong in my training on a lot of occasions is where I've developed a rule or a hard approach about what is okay and what is not okay. And I've followed that rule ignoring the context of the situation in terms of what is being presented. So, for instance, if we were to use the example of a horse coming into our space, that rule would be no horse at any time is allowed into my space. And that's kind of a hard-eyed approach to it, a tunnel-visioned right or no, black and white situation. Whereas now, if we look at the context, it's like in situation one, if we have a horse that is running over us and there's a safety issue with that, then I might enforce a certain amount of personal space to keep us both safe. But if we're in a situation where, for all intents and purposes, I know the horse well and there's a relationship element that's being developed through that intimacy being established, then you don't have to enforce the same restrictions because the context of it is completely different and it means something different. And that comes with the awareness of like the subtle signals that they give off and understanding what it is they're requiring in the moment, like a certain degree of comfort or connection.
And these days, I don't actually enforce the personal space thing these days at all. And you might think, well, how do you not get run over? I don't enforce the personal space things, but if a horse is close to me and connected to me, which means they're very aware of me and they're engaging with me, I'm in no danger. If they're very close to me and their head's up and their ears are off somewhere else and their shoulders closer to me than their head, like they've kind of walked past me and they're almost leaning into me, I'm in danger right there, but I don't enforce my personal space. I create some energy, enough energy for them to have to step back and focus on me. And what it's like if I held a piece of paper up really close to your face and said, read that, you'd almost have to pull your head back to look at it. I create some energy without directing energy at them. So if this is a podcast, so you can't really see things, but think about doing jumping jacks versus snap kicks. I'm not directing any energy at them. I create some energy, but it's localized energy here, but it's not directing at them. And they step back and they look at you. So they're out of your space, and what they'll do is they're now connected to. The other day, one of those horses at the Horse Expo, I think it was the nervous warm blood the first day, I said, okay, he's too close to me right now and I want to get him away from me, but he's not connected with me. Now watch what happens if I use this flag and tap him on the chest or the front legs to get him to back up. He backed up away from me, but his ears stayed like lateral ears, like disinterested ears. And so I got him to move away from me, but he went mentally inside. He didn't connect with me. And so then I waited a bit and I let him come up close again and he wasn't connected. I did the jumping jack type thing. He stepped back and flicked his ears towards me and then licked his lips and relaxed. And the time before, so if you think about how you get a horse out of your space, you can actually create some connection and relaxation, or you can get them out of your space and get them to be more mentally distanced from you and hold on to some triggers they already had. And for me, it's a game changer about that's been a huge difference. And I see a lot of people get their horse out of their space and the horse moves backwards but never connects with them, which means those ears don't flick forward, those eyes don't look at them, which means they kind of go inside their head and kind of go, there's no changing thought, essentially. Actually, sometimes the thought gets worse.
Disconnection.
Because I really think, we've all heard the saying, if you're depressed, you're living in the past, and if you're anxious, you're living in the future. I think those horses whose head are stuck up in the air and their ears are pricked and they're looking at something, they're a little bit anxious, as in they're looking over there and go, what is that going to do? Is it going to come get me? And that's what that horse was doing before I tapped him on the chest. So he went from being anxious, thinking how they, and then when I tapped him on the chest, he kind of went inside himself. And not that he's thinking about the past, but I think when you were depressed, you were in your head a lot, like in your head. I think people who are anxious are in their head about external things. I think depression's a bit of in your head about internal things. I don't know, but if I was going to give them human names like that, I'd say when he was standing with his ears up and looking at something in the distance, he was anxious. And when I moved him backwards, he became depressed. He went inside his head. Whereas when I created the little wall of energy that I created for him to step backwards, he was present. He was right there. He licked his lips. He reset himself. And I got it on video, so I was really happy to do that because I probably used a little snippet somewhere, but it worked exactly the way I expected it to work. And it's funny, you just said about Sally Swift, hard eyes and soft eyes. I did a clinic in Washington State a couple of years ago, and a lady said, I do a lot of trail riding. On the trail, my horse rides really forward. He's nice and forward, and it's easy to get to canter, but in the arena, I can't get him to canter at all. And she said, he just doesn't like the arena. And so I watched how she was riding, and the arena we were in has a covered roof and 4-foot sides on it, but you can see out, and it's in Washington State, so there's a beautiful snow-capped mountain in the distance. And I noticed when this lady's riding down, say, the long side of the arena, when she gets about halfway down, her weight shifts to the inside and her head turns to the inside and her eyes go down over her horse's inside shoulder. And she starts thinking about the corner that's coming up in 30 metres, if it's a dressage-sized arena. And all I said to her is, you look to me like you're riding inside the fence. I said, forget the fence is there. Look at that snow-capped mountain down there and think you're going to ride to the top of that. And all of a sudden, her horse freed up and away he went. And he was still in the arena. And it's just so easy to blame horses and say, oh, he doesn't like arenas, but he likes the trail. But a lot of times, and so we talked about stuff, and someone at the clinic said, oh, yeah, that's what Sally Swift called soft eyes and hard eyes. And when she's on the trail, she has soft eyes. She's looking everywhere, just taking the whole picture. And whereas in the arena, she had hard eyes for the corner. She'd come around one corner, and she's got hard eyes for the next corner, but she didn't have that soft focus and think forward. And the difference in that horse was amazing. And I didn't actually... it wasn't a forward issue. We didn't have to work on our seat aid, leg aid, whip aid, any of those things.
It was an intention issue.
It was an intention issue, exactly.
Yeah. I watched 3 minutes of the footage from the clinic as part of one of the recordings from this weekend. And 2 things I really liked in there. One was the observation or description you were telling me about how one particular lady was handling her horse. And that was her horse had come into the arena and was quite distracted and kind of walking in every which way direction. And she wasn't being authoritative in terms of how we would typically see it in terms of her being the leader and taking him in one way, but she also wasn't not going with him. Do you know what I mean? So there was this ambiguous ground between the conversation or the clarity of the conversation happening between them. And then we got to the discussion on, or within that actual video itself, there was a discussion on passive leadership and what we might see as the normal mode of leadership, which is us taking control of the direction and what it is that we want to do with our horse. I found that really interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was the anxious warm blood. And the lady who was leading him wasn't getting a response from him, but she wasn't giving up control either. She was just kind of half controlling him. She was kind of nagging him without getting anything to happen. And
I think it was unconscious as well. Like she wasn't really conscious of that being the case.
I don't think she was very present about the whole thing. So when I took hold of him, I worked a little bit on getting his attention. And when I got his attention, he relaxed a lot more. And then he kind of started to sniff the ground and want to wander around. So I went with him and I was telling the crowd, I was telling the difference between active leadership and passive leadership. And active leadership would be when I'm taking control. Passive leadership when I'm allowing him to take control. He's not taking control of me. I'm allowing him to take control. And I kind of followed him around there for a bit, and I was saying, so right now I'm in a passive leadership state, but passive leadership is not him pulling the rope out of my hand. Passive leadership is me going with him, and I had some slack in the lead rope and I was following him and I was actually trying to match his footsteps as well, which helps with connection too. And I said, if I was wanting to take over the leadership role, I would do this. And I just turned and walked off, and he followed me for a bit, and then I stopped and then I said, now I'm going to turn over that leadership to him. So I think, some people think the whole passive leadership is letting your horse drag you around and run over you, and that's actually no leadership at all. And when the horse has no leadership, that's when they get concerned because they would, like horses from a herd situation, they rely on each other to be the watchful eye, and some of them can rest while the others are present and not necessarily alert but aware and keep an eye out for danger. And so, they rely on each other for that. And if you are not a good leader, and that doesn't mean a good boss, but if you're not a good leader, they can't really trust your judgment, so they can't really let down and be relaxed.
They feel the need to be vigilant. And
and that horse was very vigilant at the start. And when the handler was trying to stop him from looking around, he was kind of shaking her off like, no, I really need to keep an eye out for stuff because you're not really aware of stuff. And that's, he wasn't saying no. If you think about it from the horse's point of view, he's not being belligerent. He's saying, one of us here has to keep an eye out, and you are not very present, and so I'm going to watch out for the both of us. And so that's a bit of a paradigm shift to think, this horse was almost pulling the lead rope out of her hands and trying to walk off and stuff. And you could look at that as that horse as being rude or arrogant or belligerent or disobedient or disrespectful.
Any number of labels.
Things. Yeah. And if you really think about it, he was trying to look after him and her at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. That's a beautiful way of looking at it, actually.
And that's a complete paradigm shift.
It really is, isn't it? Yeah. The other thing I really appreciated was something that I've been working on a lot and talking about a lot the last couple of months, which is noticing or not attaching a story or a narrative or labels to what it is that you're observing. And from the position that I've been teaching it, it's noticing the ember of an emotion and not exaggerating the emotion or feeling the need to add a story to it, but being able to be present with it, and then there's a natural flow to how that happens. And what you were describing in the video, and just to set the scene for those of you who are obviously not watching on video, the horse had his nose on the ground and it looked like he was about to roll. And you were talking about just observing what was happening without preempting or feeling like you were creating what was happening mentally. It was really interesting the way that you framed it.
Well, there was a couple of hundred people there watching, and this horse, he kind of went to sniffing, he was no longer worried about him. He wasn't keeping an eye out for the saber-toothed tiger, so to speak. He was kind of connected with me, and then he put his nose on the ground and started wandering around, so I just kind of followed him. And at one point in time, his nose was on the ground, he was pawing the ground, and his knees were kind of buckling, he was kind of walking in circles. And I said, so what does everybody here think he's doing? And they all said, he's going to roll. And I said, okay, I need you to all to perish the thought. I need you to put that out of your mind, because if you have that expectation of him rolling and you're all half holding your breath like, he's going to roll. 20 minutes ago, he was running around knocking the lady over and whinnying and carrying on, and now he's going to roll. This is amazing. Oh my God, he's going to roll, he's going to roll. I said, get that out of your mind, because that energy of expectation in the air will prevent him from rolling. And I said, I'm not, and they all laughed. And I said, I'm not kidding. I want you to focus on your breathing. Make sure you're not holding your breath. And right now, what is this horse doing? His nose is on the ground and he's pawing with his front foot. That's what he's doing. Thinking he's going to roll is attaching a story to it. And so right before we started doing that, the announcer said 5 minutes till the end. And he started doing that. And everybody's thinking he's going to roll. And I told them, get rid of the idea. And then he kind of acted like he didn't want to roll. And so I actually got, I was not expecting him to roll or hoping he'd roll, but I think I must have got rid of the expectation that he was going to do it before the end of the session. And about 2 minutes to go, down he went and had a big old roll.
Nice.
And I really think that I had a lady at a clinic in Australia a couple of years ago when I started working on what I now call the focus work. And she was standing there with a horse and she was waiting for him to lick and chew. And she was waiting and she was waiting and she was waiting. Her name was Yvette, lovely lady. And I went up to her and I said, Yvette, just relax, just breathe, just let go of any expectation of what's going to happen, just start to breathe. And she started focusing on her breathing, and a couple of minutes later he had a big old sigh and a big lick and chew, and then 2 minutes later he put his nose on the ground, walked around in circles, and he lay down. And he doesn't normally lay down, but she had this expectation. And for you ladies listening to this thing, if you cast your mind back to like first dates, you can kind of sense in the air if that guy you're on the first date with has an expectation of a certain thing happening at the end of this date. And you can also sense when it's not there, and they're just having a good time. We're going to go out, we're having a kind of conversation. It is what it is. But I think you can sense that needy expectation there, and horses are way more intuitive than we are, and they really sense that expectation, that tightness, and that lack of, like, when I said make sure everybody make sure you're breathing, everybody kind of checked in, and you could see them kind of like, oh, I was holding my breath.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool.
So how are you feeling today after the expo?
I feel a little bit foggy. Yeah, I was just saying to Robin earlier, we were talking about how people describe having a clinic hangover after they've been at the clinic, and I think I have an expo hangover. It's a nice state of being, but I definitely feel a little bit slower on the uptake than usual.
Yeah, I mean, our booths were side by side, and there was a lot of people at my booth, a lot of people at your booth, and because we're not actually selling any product, they come there to talk to us and ask questions, and it's hard to be on
It is
for that long. And for me, I don't find it as hard doing clinics where I'm on for like 10 hours a day sort of thing, but that's on with what's going on with horses. And I find that some of the questions you can get from people can be a little bit draining, especially if their mindset, if it's really hard for them to get their head around what you're trying to tell them. I will stand there all day and explain it 10 different ways, and I found that's a brain drain. That is really draining, whereas I find that talking to people who are of the same mindset and have that same vibration and that same vibe or whatever, that's
more cyclic.
That's almost energizing, talking to people like that. But when you try to, and I'm not saying that we had a lot of people that come up and ask questions who were not of this mindset. You mentioned it earlier. I find that a lot of people that came to at least my demos, the experience I had at my demos, is people would come up afterwards and they've been looking for this thought process and going, people come and say thank you for the way you're approaching things. And then sometimes you have come up people and they come up and they go, I never really looked at it that way before. And a lot of times they get a little bit teary-eyed, like I think they kind of start beating themselves up over the way they've been around their horses or thought about their horses or thought about life in general in the past. And that's not my intention at all to make them feel that way, but you can almost tell the people that have had a little bit of an epiphany about things, and you can almost see they're playing this mental movie and almost beating themselves up about different things. And if I recognise that, I'll kind of go, hey, don't worry about what you've done in the past. Your horse will forgive you.
Yeah, I was talking to Katie Negranti, who came. She's a good friend of both of ours, and I got to know Katie on the road to WEG last year, and I call her my WEG wife. She's pretty special to me. But anyway, I was saying to her how grateful I feel that I have a job that cuts through the small talk. Like generally when people come up to the booth or I'm talking to them after a clinic, it's like we go straight into the hard stuff, like I lost my mum or this has happened, and we're having these proper conversations where people are really laying their heart on the line, and I so appreciate that. Like it feels like such an honour to be able to connect with someone that essentially you don't know on that level straight away. Like to me that's such a huge honour and something that I don't take for granted at all. And it is really interesting. One of the overriding things that came up for me this weekend is that people have been trying to maintain a facade of something for a period of time.
Yeah.
And in the case of grief or loss, or perhaps even we can think about grief in a slightly different way. Like there was someone that I talked to who had lost her mum and was suppressing the feelings that she was going through, and just saying to her, your feelings are totally valid. Like you've been through this huge upturn, and it was in relation to how it was affecting her horses, and she realised that she hadn't let herself go to that place. And I think a lot of us do that because we feel like if we go to that place, in inverted commas, it means that we're going to stay in that place, or it somehow is indicative of something that we are that we don't want to be, like we're weak or we're going to be depressed forever now, or, we don't let ourselves cycle through the hard stuff because we attach a story to it that tells us that this might mean something about us that we don't want it to mean, and so we avoid going there. So there's those conversations on very hard and deep levels that I really appreciate. And then the other types of grief and loss, which is around, I did a clinic on injury, and that was very much around the discussion that people have, which is when they get injured, either emotionally or physically, that one of the biggest fears is that you're not going to be the same again. And that feeling of loss and grief is really powerful within that place, and we have a very poor understanding of what that means. And so I love to think of this work and the work that you're doing, Warwick, as like an emotional alchemy. You aren't going to be the same. If you go through an epiphany or a trauma or a crisis, be that positive or negative, you're not going to be the same, but it's a matter of taking it and actually creating an empowering context around it and allowing yourself to experience the emotion so you don't get stuck in it, but then taking it to a better place afterwards where you're like, I know now how to do this, or I can empathize with this person on this level because I've been through this experience. And I think with our horse training, it's if we can allow ourselves to be broken open and even to say, this experience where I couldn't do stuff or I'm experiencing this huge challenge with my horse has been such a blessing because it's led me to this, it's led me to this understanding. And for me, like the actual stuff which I would consider to be the crap stuff that I've gone through has caused me to look at things differently and caused me to find you in horse training and other things. And, if we were always attached to the highs or the story was only shiny, we'd be pretty boring, I think. So, yeah, I know that totally got off topic, but it just sort of sparked my thought process about the conversations I was having over the weekend, and they were some of the big ones.
At the start of that, you kind of said you're lucky or whatever to be able to have those people come up and have those conversations with you. But I think that is all reciprocal, because when you did your talks, you're actually speaking from the heart, and you're up there and you're actually being vulnerable. And the thing about that, I learnt this from Brene Brown, and I've learned it from actually doing it as well. But, Brene Brown talks about when you are vulnerable, you expect people to judge you, laugh at you, make fun of you, snicker, whatever. And what you find is when you do that, you get head nodding and you get me too. And it's hard to do, I think initially, is to open up about stuff like that. But I think there's a lot of growth in that. But when you do, it's so validating because you always get back. You never get back the whole... On Facebook recently, I put up a post. I was in an airport, and I used to, when I walk through airports, I people watch. I don't know if you people watch, but I people watch, and I imagine you could probably people watch and look at the good in everybody, but I know I didn't. When I people watch, I'm judging. I'm looking at everybody, and I think, you left the house like that this morning? Don't you own a mirror? You need to knock off the cheeseburgers. You would wear that. It's too hot for that. You don't have enough clothes on. You've got too many clothes on. You're too tall. You're too short. Just all this judgmental stuff. And I didn't realise that I did it as much as I did. And once I did a thing last year where I was counting judgmental thoughts and become aware of judgmental thoughts. But recently I was in an airport, going back to travelling this year. I didn't travel last year. And what I do in airports now, when I'm walking through an airport, everybody that's walking the other way, I look them in the eye as they're coming towards me. Sometimes they don't even look at you. Sometimes I look you in the eye and they look away. And sometimes I look you in the eye and you smile with your eyes at them and they smile with their eyes at you. And that's it. You get that little spark of connection. But everybody I look at, I think to myself, may you be happy. May you be happy. May you be happy. May you be happy. And, it sounds like a bit of a woo-woo sort of a thing to do. But when you get to the other end of the airport, you actually have this nice energy, this uplifting energy in your heart, in your, wherever it is you feel things. And I realise now, when I used to judge, I would get to the other end of the airport and have this negative, heavy sort of an energy that I didn't even realise I had because it was always there. And so I put that on social media here recently, and that's being a bit vulnerable, thinking the guy in the cowboy hat walking around the airport going, may you be happy. So one of the other clinicians at the expo this weekend he's a big name in the whole business, been around forever. And he's a deep-voiced cowboy, man's man. Got a very firm handshake, by the way. And he came up to me and he says, hey, I've been watching you on social media and I really like what you're saying. He said, but the thing I really, really liked your may you be happy thing. I could have fallen over backwards right then. I'm like, that's the last person I would expect to watch me on, to follow me on social media anyway. But to say the whole may you be happy thing was a good thing. Yeah. Like, that's just it's not the thing I expected from him. I would expect from him, you need to knock off that hippie crap, you're getting a bit out there is what I would expect. And I think that's just our own insecurities or whatever. But you really find that when you get out there and you be who you are. I
think it's a conditioning thing as well, because what I notice in myself, and I feel like I'm a fairly naturally bubbly and enthusiastic person.
Really?
I know, it's crazy, but I easily wear my heart on my sleeve. So for me, having those conversations is actually just how I like to communicate. Like it kind of rolls out of me in that way. The real hang up is afterwards when I think about what I've said And then I would start to, oh, you were too much of this, you were too much of that. People are not going to think you're professional. You know, you need to tone it down. Maybe you were too much, too much, too much. That was the conversation that I used to have with myself. And so you'd be very honest in the moment, and then you'd spend the next day thinking about how it was you were, you know, like if it was a presentation or you had a conversation with someone that mattered to you, I would have that conversation. And now the practice, I don't feel it, I feel it less and less because I've practiced ignoring that negative voice that comes up. But the other thing
that... Good friend of mine calls that the itty-bitty shitty.
She does, hey, yeah. I really practice doing that, and it is an ongoing practice. But the other thing that I do now is I think of anything that is creative or that I do, and that can be a conversation or, you know, an interaction, anything, is that I do that thing and I do it with the best of intention, and then I release it and I go on to the next thing. So I don't continually brood or marinate over things which have happened, for better or for worse. It's just like, that is done. That's that creative exploration in whatever way you want to frame it. I release it and then I go on, and that helps me not get caught up in the stuff that sometimes comes up afterwards. So, and like you say, the vulnerability of it, when I first started in business, I had this idea of what it meant to be professional. And that was really important to me. So I didn't really add too much of myself in there because it was more about the content and it was about this and trying to help people. And then the more of myself I've added to the mix, I noticed that the first post where I really felt like, oh, that was a bit much, you know, like, and I pressed post on Facebook or whatever it was, and there's just like a flood of comments and people interacting. Like the more real you are, the more connection you get, because like you say, everyone's just like, me too. That's the beauty of it. So the practice of that is just kind of showing up and giving of yourself.
Yeah, I think so. Like at the start of this conversation, you said, you know, there seems to be a groundswell of people out there who are interested in, you know, some of the stuff we're on about these days, and I think they've always been interested in it. I just don't think it was available or talked about, or...
Yeah, I agree.
You know, I think, you know, I imagine quite a few of your listeners would be in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, think about, you know, I'm 53. Think about when I was a kid, no one talked about a lot of anything to do with emotions, feelings, any of that stuff. No one was terribly vulnerable. And nowadays, if I'm in Australia doing a clinic and I go to the pub for dinner or whatever, and I go into the bathroom, on the wall there's a poster about men's mental health. So it's a topic of conversation these days. It's not taboo to talk about anymore.
Yeah.
And I really think learning to get along with horses is probably some of the best mental health help you can get. And I've had a lot of feedback from people with this, there's stuff you're doing now. It's really made me see life differently, and I get along better with my husband. And I've always heard, you know, from the horse training stuff that people get along better with their workmates or whatever. And that's on a one level, but this is another level. This is a deeper level, I think. And people are, you know, showing up a bit more authentically with everybody in their life. And yeah, it's just been amazing, the feedback.
I've noticed as well, and not to compartmentalise, but the horsemen that I really respect and admire that I've met at some of the bigger expos or some of the bigger shows, the ones who are truly, I don't know how to describe it, on the path or really interested in connection and partnership and that deeper layer that exists that's connected to the more sublime stuff, they're very collaborative. They're very mutually respectful of their peers and other trainers and very open to discussion from all different areas. There's not this fixedness of needing to protect their position. And I think that comes with once you do get to a certain level, not level of success, it's more a level of comfort within yourself or a level of okayness with yourself, that you're no longer threatened by things on the outside and you don't feel the need to like put someone down or dismiss someone who doesn't agree with you because it's just not part of... It's not necessary anymore.
Yeah, I really think it's when you get to the point where you realise you don't know anything.
Yeah.
You know, you get past, and I've been there, you know, you get past the point where you think you kind of know what you're doing, and then you realize, oh my God, I know so little. And I think that's when your ego goes away and you become a lot more open. There's a guy that was at the Horse Expo on the weekend who wasn't presenting, who could present at any Horse Expo in the world and be a major hit. So he looks at all sorts of interesting stuff. But Mustang Maddie, she's coming to visit us today. She's going to stay the night tomorrow. Well, he's driving down here tomorrow. He's going to pick Mustang Maddie up, and they are going to go over to Monterey. So we're about 45 minutes from the coast here. One of the biggest aquariums in the United States is over there. And he's going to go take Mustang Maddie over to Monterey, and they're going to go and visit his friend who clicker trains seals and dolphins. And, you know, he's just into everything. Fascinating guy.
An openness to learning.
Yeah.
I always think, oh, if I only had that horse now with the knowledge that I have now, I'd be able to do X, Y, and Z. Or you realise the type of deal that you've given horses in the past that you think, oh, I can see now that behaviour that I classified as this was just that they were anxious, and I wish that I I kind of had the knowledge now that I have.
Yeah, in the past, if I got a horse back that I'd trained a few years before, I would always tend to think, oh, I've got a better way of training this horse now. And it was all about the training. Now if I come across a horse I've trained before, it's not so much, oh, I could train this horse better. It's like, this horse has got too much training and not enough relationship. I mean, I've been through it with my horses, and I was just outside with Bundy this morning, and Bundy used to have like a look of resignation on his face. Mm-hmm. You know, I could go catch him, I could do anything I want with him, but he was just there. And now I go out in the pasture and Bundy's ears prick and his eyes brighten up, and he comes over and, hey,
you're one of his homies.
Yeah, I'm one of his homies. And I wasn't one of his homies before. I was just like, I was a boss that paid him quite well.
Yeah.
But I wasn't a bad boss, but I wasn't his friend.
Yeah.
I was just...
If he won lotto, he wouldn't choose to come back to work.
Yes, exactly. If he won lotto, he wouldn't come back to work. Good way of putting it, Jane, yeah. But now he looks like, you know, if he won lotto, we'd go hang out on his yacht together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. I know. I think, although this is kind of ironic given what happened last year, but even though you've been a World Equestrian Games competitor now twice, would you say, well, I know for me, I'll talk from my own experience, that my aspirations used to be competitively focused. And now that's it's secondary to the actual experience or the process of being out there. Like that, there is so much intrinsic reward within the session just through the little things that happen, that I'm no longer seeking this bigger feeling of like gratification or the high that you perhaps get from competition, because I'm getting that every day when I work with my horses, because what I'm looking for that means success, or I don't know, it's just a whole different way of looking at things, and that gratification comes just through the day-to-day now. I don't seek it elsewhere.
Yeah, I think for me the gratification comes through the connection.
Yeah.
And if you can keep the connection and get the cool stuff happening, even better.
Yeah.
But so there's a lady who lives here in America named Logan Darrow, and Logan's been to probably 10 of my clinics, maybe more, and she takes photographs, and sometimes she'll make little memes with photographs of me and things I've said, or maybe things somebody else said, and put a picture of me or a picture of someone else and something I said. But one of her memes a little while ago said, and it wasn't my quote, but I love it. It said, "These days I'm less interested in what I can get my horse to do and more interested in how they feel about it." And yeah, that's where I'm at these days. So for me, it's all about the connection thing. And then if you can do something competitive and keep that connection, that's even better. But it's hard enough to do without having, especially like, you know, with my background with the reining. Reining is not like dressage to where you can go to a show and do the prelim pattern or whatever it's called, where you walk and trot straight lines in 20-meter circles. Reining is like, it's not as hard as Grand Prix dressage, but it's almost like Prix St. George sort of thing. When you go to a reining show, you're expected to do all the hard stuff.
Yeah.
There is no
dynamic. Yeah.
And so it's you know, even to get a horse to do the reining and still maintain the connection, I think is, you know, it's hard enough.
So what excites you about the future? What are you looking forward to?
What am I looking forward to? Oh, wow. Whoa, that's a great question. Do we have a whole podcast to talk about that?
We do.
We need another whole,
ironically, we do.
We need another whole podcast to talk about that. What am I excited about in the future? I am excited about the fact that I've just kind of, it's almost like, what was his name? Jim Carrey on The Truman Show. Was it The Truman Show where he was living in that bubble?
Yeah.
It's like I've opened the door and realised I've been living in a bubble, and that was just a tiny little part of everything, and I've stepped outside and I'm like, wow, what the hell is out here? So that's what I'm excited about, is exploring what's outside the bubble I've been living in for quite a while.
I love that. I love that. I think that seems like the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
No worries. Glad to have you stay with us.
That's all from us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be super appreciative if you took a screenshot and shared it to any of your social media channels. Be sure to tag me in as well so I can revel in your awesomeness. If you want to learn more about me or Warwick, or are interested in working with us, you can check out our websites. Mine is www.confidentrider.online, and you can see all the info on my membership program Joyride there. Warwick is www.warwickschiller.com. He has loads of free content on horse training and the likes, which is well worth looking into, so make sure you take the time to check it out. That aside, have a fabulous day, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with you again soon.